So heading into Fallout New Vegas now, you're the lead designer. You've talked a little bit about the sense of discovery and exploration that Bethesda's really good at. What were your goals for the New Vegas project? And in hindsight, how close do you feel you came to achieving all of them?
Well, I mean, I had a number of goals. One was I wanted to look at the systems that were in the game and try to sort of refine them, whether it was the special system, the skill system, things like that. I wanted to look at perks and sort of refine that list and make them feel more distinct from each other. Remove a lot of the perks that were more like skill bonus sort of related things, focus more on things that gave individual gameplay benefits. I also, from a gameplay perspective, wanted to really make the choices the player made throughout the course of the game feel like they had a lot more impact from moment to moment and in the long term. And I conceived of the basic plot structure, which is, I'm sorry, I should back up a little bit. I believe Chris Avallone thought of the sort of initial element of Fallout New Vegas, which is you get shot in the head and dropped in a shallow grave in the desert, and you're left there and you survive. And which seems like a very Vegas-y sort of thing.
Yeah.
That was sort of like the key pitch element. So I took that and then I said, okay, so you are going to start there and you're going to end the game dealing with the Battle of Hoover Dam, which is for control of the water and power in the New Vegas area. And I said, and that primarily is a conflict between the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion. And then I worked with John Gonzalez, who was our creative lead, to flesh out the greater story. And John is really responsible for fleshing out the characters, the sub-factions, all of that sort of stuff. Mr. House developing those characters and writing most of those characters. And I wanted the player to feel like they would slowly get to know these different factions over the course of the early game before they really knew that they were going to be making a choice about whom to choose from. So early on, you're just looking for Benny. And so I said, that's your goal, is to find this guy, Benny. But your course through the Mojave Wasteland takes you past NCR, takes you past Caesar's Legion. It brings you into contact with groups like the Followers of the Apocalypse, all these other groups, and then eventually into contact with Mr. House. And then once you deal with Benny, now you're at the center of this conflict between all of these major factions. And you've seen enough of them that you maybe have some opinions about them and you can start to work with them. But I wanted the continuous sort of exposure to those factions over the course of the game to also change your expectations of who they were. I think a lot of people saw the NCR and thought, well, this is like America. This is like the good guys. But then the more they interacted with them, they saw like, this is pretty corrupt. There are some really petty people in control here. This is a very dysfunctional government. And interacting with Caesar's Legion, initially they appear to be just completely psychotic. But then they can learn that there is this very weird underlying philosophy to why Caesar is doing what he's doing. And for most people, that doesn't forgive Caesar's Legion for doing what it's doing, but it makes them more comprehensible, I think, to people. And really, in the end, I wanted your sort of choice to be one that really felt like you were kind of snaking between these different factions and going like, I don't know, like maybe these guys will be good, but geez, I think maybe this is going to work out badly for these folks. And I guess I could support Mr. House, but God, Mr. House wants me to destroy the Brotherhood of Steel, and I don't really think they need to be destroyed. And I wanted to put players in the situation where they were questioning their own values and their own morals and what they really wanted to see in the Capital Wasteland. Or I'm sorry, the Mojave Wasteland.
So you mentioned in that that you wanted to have players be making choices that paid off and changed the game in the long term. We hear, as players, we hear that from developers a lot, and sometimes, in fact, I say most of the time, it doesn't. Usually, you end up in the same place, no matter what. You might just take a slightly different path to get there. So, as a gameplay designer, how do you actually do that? Like, what is the sort of process for making sure that actually comes true in a game when it's your goal?
Well, you have to plan for it. That's really important. You have to set certain ground rules for the designers that they're not allowed to violate. One of the ones in Fallout New Vegas that was really focused on player freedom, which this is sort of tangential to what you're talking about, but I think it goes towards a larger point, is I said from the beginning, you have to be able to kill any character in this game who is not a child as soon as you have a clear line of fire at them. basically. So I said, if you want to open a door and have a character talk to someone, that's fine. But as soon as that conversation ends, you have to assume that the player has killed that character. You have to make your quest fail or move on or basically wrap up. It needs to be valid and viable, assuming that the character dies. And that went from even minor characters all the way up to Caesar and things like that. And there are certain sacrifices you have to make to say, like, there's going to be reactivity to this, but it has to be compartmentalized. And that's a really important thing. I think going all the way back to the early games I worked on, we had a lot of grand ambitions for these wildly diverging storylines. There are certainly RPGs that have tried doing this. I think Witcher 2 is kind of notable for having a really diverging storyline. That's a ton of work because you're essentially making a completely different critical path line. And ultimately, I think you get less bang for your buck out of it. Really what we try to focus on is small scale reactivity, both immediately and then in the long run. So one that I think we did a reasonably good job with in Fallout New Vegas that I like to refer to, which is a side quest, is one called the Whitewash. And it's a side quest where you're dealing with water being stolen from the NCR sharecropper's farm. And when you initially meet a farmer who says, like, I can't make my quotas because I'm not being given the water that I'm supposed to be given, what the hell is going on? Somewhere we're losing water. And it's this basically just a plot stolen from Chinatown. You weave your way through it and you eventually find out it's this guy from the Followers of the Apocalypse, or formerly from the Followers of the Apocalypse, who is siphoning water off to help locals so that they can actually grow enough food to just survive. And he's like, look, I'm doing this. I'm not going to apologize for it. Yeah, an NCR guy found out about it and I had to kill him to protect the secret. And that's what I had to do. And if you don't like it, then I guess you have to just deal with it. And a lot of players are like, well, I don't really want to cut off water to these people living in this area. So they're like, well, okay, dude, I guess your secret's safe, whatever. And then way later, we have a timer set so that way later, if you're wandering around the Mojave Wasteland near the sharecropper's farm, that farmer will come up to you and be like, hey, asshole, thanks for not figuring out what the hell happened to the water. I got lost my plot of land. I have to go back to California. Thanks for nothing. And it's like it's a small thing. It's actually very easy to do, but it's something where the player goes like, oh my God, like this is 10 hours later and there's this reactivity to this little thing that I did. And things like that, is if you plan for them and you really focus on, like, it's very important that a quest has a long-term reaction, whether it's a character turning up in a different, like another one that I liked is at Camp McCarran, there was a guy named Little Buster. And he's this like little dude in spiked armor, and he's just an unarmed guy. And he did a couple of bounties before you start doing bounties. And he says, yeah, I already made all my money here. I'm going to go to the strip and just make a fortune. See you later, man. And he leaves. And then later on, as you're going through the sort of the Freeside area, which is pretty full of crime, you just find his dead body. and you're like, oh, crap, this guy wound up getting jumped and killed. And it's just stuff like that where it's just like, have a small payoff for these little choices and interactions that the player has, and it makes the world feel much more alive. It makes it feel like it grows and changes over time. It's not about planning for these epic things that diverge in massive ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.